With only hundredths of a second separating the first few drivers, we should have a cracker of a race on our hands.
And hopefully, Tiff, there will not be another front-running car crashing out at the chicane like there was in the first race. But anyways, it's time for what should signify the halfway point of the showdown. Once I am done with this race, we should have 12 races left. I've qualified in the top 10 after managing to cut the chicane in the right area. Could have gone faster if I really wanted to, but I just wasn't really bothered about going for another lap after that one. I basically knew I was just wanting to at least make sure I put up a reasonable enough effort to the point of where I could at least... Yep, okay. Am I surprised to see that sort of manoeuvre being pulled off? Not really. But anyways. Just knocking that Peugeot out of the way. It is the first lap after all, and already Derek Warwick is running wide and basically throwing away his chance of potentially scoring points here. And doesn't look as though this race is going to be anywhere near as easy as the first one was. I also realised I did not show off the pit stop. I'm probably going to have to do that at some point, but ultimately I don't know when or where I'm going to show it off. So at least I can say the leaders are actually through the chicane this time, as I can see one of the runners up ahead of me. It's probably Jason Plato who is up ahead of me, but either way, I do technically have a 40 plus point lead. I think that was Plato who I just spun into the grass whilst I was battling with John Cleland here, who was driving what was formerly the car I used to win the championship previously. It would be nice if James Thompson could maybe get a race win, because he has come close a number of times to potentially winning a race, and I can definitely say it would be most intriguing to see him actually win a race, IMO. And it is fair to say Thompson probably will score a win for Honda before the season's out, if the stars align in his favour. But we must focus on the here and now, and right here, right now, I am closing in on the leaders, and I have two Audis up ahead of me. Of course, I do also recall having an incident with Jamie Bintcliffe last time out at Alton Park, which basically wrecked him out of the race. Even though I cannot say for sure he was at fault for that incident. But if there is any responsibility for me to take, then I probably will take it. But I'm not going to feel too much remorse for it, because under the circumstances, I know these AI will just go mental when they have the advantage. And it is fair to say that's kind of what they're doing here, so, you know. I have a little remorse, but I cannot really say I've got that much. But in terms of knowing what I have altogether, I don't have that much remorse. if I'm being completely honest. Well, I'm running in 6th at the moment, so the way I see it, it'll be questionable to see how many points I can claw back, but hopefully I can manage to claw back enough to the point of where I will at least manage to maintain a 30-point lead heading into Croft. I know that will be one of Menu's best tracks. I'm also quite sure he could potentially achieve the weekend sweep if he is going to do what I think he's going to do. But then after that, it'll come back into my favour again because we have Knockhill and then Snetterton. So it is fair to say that whilst the next track will benefit Menu, I can also say the tracks after that, the next 2 tracks, FYI, will be more beneficial to me. Because I know that even though the Croft circuit, I did manage to score a win there in the Vauxhall, but I know from personal experience it's a circuit which tends to favour the runners more than it favours me. I think Menu probably is leading this race, although I cannot tell for sure. And yes, he is, because I can see a Honda up ahead of these 2 guys. I have won 9 races in the first 11, and it is fair to say I could potentially win 9, and it is fair to say it could be 9 races of the first 12 races. The Menu, I can say, is definitely fighting back with a vengeance, because he's probably pulling away from us now, the way I see it. But anyways, briefly up into 2nd position. And shit. I spun the Honda out. I was not wanting to do that. But whatever. I think the best position I can really manage in this race is probably 2nd. Because I think at this stage, since I do have a 30+ points lead at this stage of the campaign, the only thing I really need to think about now is consistency. And making sure I ascertain all the sweets when I can receive them. Not in terms of scoring pole position, but I just mean in terms of, you know, getting the wins and making sure I have the results to showcase it. So Menu is just up ahead of me, but since I know this track is longer than Alton Park, I am pretty sure I will have a stronger chance of catching up to him. But hopefully this time we will not crash like we did in the previous race. As I'm now heading down into the chicane once again, stepping on the brakes and going through and going a second quicker on this lap. I know the AI this season have been contradictory in terms of their results, But I also know in the next 2 races, Menu is probably going to have my ass nailed to the wall in terms of overall track speed, and he is closing in on one of the back markers now. That looks like one of the Peugeots just up ahead of him, and yes it is. I'm slowly closing in on Menu as I now have just 2 seconds between myself and the leading Renault. I get past Tim Harvey there in the number 11 Peugeot car, and we are closing in on some heavy traffic. So I'm now only 7 tenths behind the Renault now. I think I saw number 2 there, so that had to be Menu, as I now take the lead here at Donington. I spun him out, but at least I can say I did not wreck him the way it happened in the previous race. But anyway, I can see Derek Warwick there in his silver Vauxhall. And now I'm going to try and see if I can help him by moving up in the running order, by at least trying to move these guys out of the way and letting Derek at least have a shot of potentially coming through with some results. Maybe seeing if he can move his way up the order by a couple of places, as I now overlap Paul Radicic there in the leading Ford. Of course, both the Ford drivers have now scored points. As I said before, I do feel a little bit of contrition for the incident which happened in the previous race and ultimately took Menu out of the race entirely, but overall, I know that's what the AI will probably do to me later on in the campaign. So, in some cases, it was a cheap shot, and to many others a chicken shit move, but again, I do need about as many points as I can gain in the first half of the campaign to prepare myself for the potential battering which could be the second half of the campaign. Even if that means I win this by an absolute margin at the end of the day, it will still count towards me getting the results I need. I'm also quite sure the points lead is not going to be as big as this by the time I get out of Donington. But again, it looks as though the superiority of my Volvo is clearly showing through once again, because I am leading this race by an absolute margin over Menu, and my teammate is now behind John Cleland in the Vauxhall. Of course, he's effectively using the car I used to win the championship, and it is fair to say at Alton Park he definitely got a good result out of it, because in the first race at Alton Park he finished 7th. So it is fair to say the Vauxhall Vectra at least in terms of me switching to Volvo, certainly has some pace. And Cleland has now effectively dumped himself into the gravel trap. I think he was trying to take me out, but ultimately any chances he had were basically pointless. And a little bit of contact there with my teammate whilst I was trying to rejoin the track. I always knew that was going to happen, but again, he does have the position now, and I think he is up into what I believe is 8th position. Although the best position Kelvin has managed so far has been 7th up to this point in the championship. His best finishing position so far has been 7th. Meanwhile, here I am leading this race, and basically, as Tiff put it, putting the professionals to shame with how much of a lead I now have, or am going to have, because I'm quite sure I'm going to have at least a 45-point lead by the time we get out of here. And part of the reason for that is technically because, well, I wrecked Menu out in the first race, partially. And yes, I know I'm still going on about it, because it could potentially seal the championship, even though, under the circumstances, I knew I was needing to at least put him at the disadvantage when we got into the chicane. I just didn't think he was going to go straight into the wall, whilst I was just trying to run him wide. That's all I was really trying to do. I wasn't trying to wreck him or anything. I was just trying to... Oh. Okay. It's alright, it's fine. I saved it. But I really cannot wait for this race to be over. In all honesty. I'm also pretty sure that by the time we get to Thruxton, things are going to get pretty sketchy, because I would imagine there are going to be plenty of incidents once we get to Thruxton. You know, I almost wonder if I should show off a pit stop now, just because I have enough time to do so, and because I am basically leaving the pack far behind me in this second race. I might do it at some point in the final 5 laps, because I said I was going to showcase a pit stop in this game, but ultimately I wasn't able to showcase it in the first race because, well, my mind basically blacked out for a moment, and I just chose to cross the line instead of just taking to the pits. However, with this race, I'm convinced it's going to be different, because I will try and make sure I do go in the pits this time. And I think that's the best overall lap time I've set around this track so far over the weekend. A 1 minute 10.5 is now officially my best lap time. So, 10 laps to go here at the Donington short circuit. It's more or less an identical image of what happened in the previous race. Of course, I'm quite sure if Menu didn't crash at the end of lap 1 in the previous race, he probably would have finished in either second or third. I don't really think he would have been able to contend with me for the win. I'm quite sure, under the circumstances, the player's overall advantage in terms of simple domination would just be, quite frankly, unmatched. But anyways, I think that was Tim Harvey who I just put another lap down there in the Peugeot. Again, unfortunately, the one thing this game doesn't have in the race display is the scoreboard. It would be nice to know if it did have the scoreboard, because then I'd be able to know the intervals of the AI, but unfortunately this game doesn't have that feature. But anyway, I am closing in on yet some more traffic, and it looks like I can see one of the Hondas there. It's probably Tarquini. Yes, it is Tarquini, who I am now overlapping, and closing in on these two Ford Mondeos and one of the Peugeots, as I'm trying to shoot my way up the inside. And oh shit, Paul Radisich dropped out. I did not think that was gonna happen second time around. And I can confidently say I had no involvement in causing that one, because I was basically well away from the rack when that happened, and I was just overlapping them and just putting them another lap down. But I did not think Paul Radisich was going to drop out of the race following that. That did actually surprise me. I also think that was a result of the two Fords colliding going into the chicane. Pretty sure they weren't fighting for points, but either way, I'm going to assume one of them thought it was a good idea to just basically rack the other. But either way, I do now know that both Ford drivers are now on the board, and for someone who has always been a staunch Ford supporter in terms of the manufacturing world, I can definitely give support to the Ford associates for the many great cars they have given to us in Britain over the years. Great cars in particular, such as the Model T, the Anglia, the Cortina, also the Thunderbird in some instances, and more recently, of course, there was also the Focus, the Fiesta, even though the Fiesta was basically made by Ford in Europe. Don't know if they have any over in the States, but if they do, it probably goes by a different name. Because in America they technically call the Ford Mondeo the Ford Contour. There's also the Ford Focus, and more recently, of course, the Ford Mustang. And the reason I say all of these magnificent models... oh yeah, and how could I forget the Escort? But yeah, all of these are makes and models in particular that were made by none other than Ford themselves, and all of those models in particular have gone onwards to be known as world as world-class icons, or simply just gone onwards to be known as national treasures in the UK car market. Oh yeah, and I also forgot the Mondeo. But you know. But yeah, it basically just goes to show I am a very staunch Ford supporter. And the other reason for that as well, because at the time, Volvo was technically owned by Ford. At least that was before the 2008 financial crash resulted in Ford basically having to sell off most of the manufacturers they own. They also previously owned Land Rover and Jaguar as well, if I'm not mistaken, before both of those companies were bought by Tata. But yeah, I mean, Ford before the '08 financial crash, they were definitely considered by many as being one of the biggest automotive multi-owners in the world at this point. It's also fair to say that the '08 financial crash also became part of the reason why Ford eventually shut down Mercury, which I can definitely say is a subsidiary brand to many of Ford's make and models, and many people could also argue the same thing about the Shelby car company as well, because technically that is Ford owned, since Carroll Shelby was able to give the Americans their only car to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I do of course refer to the Ford GT40 when I say that, because the GT40 won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 4 years in a row from 1966 to 69, where Ford basically, as Henry Ford II put it, kicked their asses. And Carroll Shelby did of course have a lot of involvement in that. And there was also a Birmingham driver and former World War II veteran, believe it or not, Ken Miles, who had officially helped out in the works of creating the legendary Ford GT40, which I would like to say is one of my two favourite race cars from the 20th century. And not just because it was designed by a Brummie, but also because the car itself ended Ferrari's domination at Le Mans at the time. And it is fair to say that Ferrari has not officially won the 24 Hours of Le Mans since 1965. As a result of Ford kicking their ass. And also because, well, Ferrari did have to deal with some fairly fierce competition. It was originally Ford, and then eventually Porsche came along, and Ferrari essentially remained in the World Sports Car Championship until 1973, or at least until the end of 1973, when Niki Lauda, may God bless his soul, had basically given Enzo Ferrari the perfect formula to ultimately winning another Constructors and Drivers' Championship. And basically what Niki Lauda said was, he told Enzo to basically shut down his World Sports Car Championship program to focus solely on Formula 1 and effectively making the car better. And it is fair to say Niki Lauda definitely impressed when he immediately went over to Ferrari, because in only his second year with the team, he became Enzo Ferrari's first world champion for 11 years. The first driver to win the championship driving for Ferrari since John Surtees did it in 1964. But yeah, I mean, Niki Lauda was part of the reason why Ferrari in the mid to late 70s were one of the best teams in Formula 1, because they won 3 championships in 6 years. Because Niki Lauda had 2 of them, and Jody Scheckter had technically clinched one of them in 1979. And that was as a result of him being generally more consistent than his fast but inconsistent teammate Gilles Villeneuve. Oh, sorry Calvin. And whilst I'm ranting about all of this, I'm now on the final lap here at Donington. And it looks as though it's officially going to be 10 wins in 12 starts for the season. I could not have thought of any better way to start out the season by winning 8 of the first 8 races, and now coming through to basically win 10 of the first 12 races, heading through the final corner now behind John Cleland's Vauxhall and across the line, and damn it, I forgot to show the pits. Oh well. Anyways, I have managed to win another race.
Here's how the race finished.
Okay, so Menu did wind up clinching second in the end of that. Thompson was third, ahead of Plato, Beeler fifth, followed by Bintcliffe, and then it was David Leslie ahead of Tarquini. And what was the rest of the order? I wonder. Is it going to load? Okay, so Cleland finished ahead of Calvin Burt, and then it was Reed ahead of Warwick, Hoy, Harvey, and Watts, who finished the running order, and Radicic retired from when I was overlapping the two boards. Anyways, on to the points.
Now, after 2 great races, let's see the championship table. A great season so far then for the new Volvo driver. At the moment, he's putting the professionals to shame.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Tiff, but... well, in terms of me partly being responsible for causing an incident I sometimes wish I didn't cause, then yes. But in terms of me just annihilating the competition and basically saying I'm gonna win the championship for sure, I wouldn't make any guarantees. I mean, I'm looking good so far, but I'm not gonna count all my eggs until they're hatched. Also, FYI, I scored 2 seconds and 4 first places in the end of the second quarter, and we have unlocked the Flaxmobile. So, we are now halfway through the Showdown, and next time we will be getting started with the third quarter, which begins at Croft. Coming up next.